So I'm now going to talk about retention of young adults. I have heard a lot of stories from employers I work with of what I can only describe as job hopping, where candidates are being lured and tempted by whether it's higher salaries or more holiday or different working environments. And I mean, back when I was training as an accountant, I didn't even realize you could move employer while you were training. I think I thought I was stuck for 3 years till I got my qualification, but it's clear that, you know, young adults particularly are much more comfortable with moving around. You know, whether that's partially been driven by the move towards remote working and whether there's an impact there on loyalty and team spirit, but be interesting to now dissect some of these ideas. So I'm going to start by calling on a first speaker for this session. So Lorraine, if I can ask you to pick up your presentation.
I will indeed. And as you've said on this occasion, it's quite interesting because they do overlap, don't they, both topics. So hopefully this will be some new information, but I feel I'm very much expanding upon points which have been covered. So I'm just getting it to slideshow. So generally, why do employees leave jobs? I'll look through the lens of a younger person in a moment, but what does all our data tell us? Why do people leave jobs? And I think undervalued is a really good point, and it follows on really nicely from what Charlotte just discussed, and that those that were not happy said that it was about salary. But actually, normally, if you drill below the surface and scratch below the surface, they feel undervalued and not being paid what they consider to be market rates really intensifies that. So at the moment, I would say, and I say this every day to our customers, don't worry about salaries. They are what they are, but just try to pay market rate. Don't worry about the crazy things you hear on the market. It's not sustainable. Just pay market rate. But I think more for the younger generation, I think what came out strongly is that their values are not aligned with the work culture, or they don't feel they have that supportive, nurturing culture. That is important to all, but in particularly important to this younger generation. I think that flexibility, and we haven't talked about that a lot yet, but that's really important from a retention perspective. I'll talk a moment about learning, and I do think, and I talked about this in the last session as well, and I agree with Charlotte, I do think this generation do actually want to be in the office to learn. So I think that's important, but I think they want flexibility around it. So if that can be offered, I think that is absolutely brilliant for all. And the role itself, I think, needs to be agile. And because they like that continuous learning, and as well as developing upwards, I think it's about developing a skill set out as well, and that's really important. Now, I've seen lots of stories over the last couple of years of job hopping, but I think, again, I just want to take a moment to also say we have been in very strange conditions because of COVID, and we have found the most bizarre things happening at all levels over the last couple of years. I was looking at the data before I met today, and we've had 4 senior partners accept a job, been looking for a year and a half. We've had 4 instances this year where they've not taken the job at the last minute. Right? So it's happening at all levels, but it's intensified, I think, at this kind of Gen Z. And I think what's actually happened is there was no real cultural or emotional connection ever, sadly, with who they were working for, because everything was done remotely. They were trained remotely, and I trained a number of associates remotely for our business, and it was very, very difficult. And they didn't enjoy it as much. So I think we have to put that lens over it as well. So I think it is something to talk about, but I would like the market just to settle for the next year, and for us to see how it all ends up moving forward. Because I don't think that people really want to move in training contract, because it is quite tricky and it is quite disruptive. So I think it's something to be aware of, but I'd be interested to see what happens over the next 12 months. But then just simply that the retention of young adults. So I've talked about why young adults leave, but what can we do to help them to stay? Because that's what we want to learn today. So we did a What Workers Want report last year. We do one every year. And the one we did last year was focused on L&D and learning. And again, when we cut the data for the younger generation, they want to learn. 95% of them are attracted to a work culture of continuous learning, whether that be face-to-face. However, they also see great value in digital learning as well. Also on your own time learning and having that facility through work that you can do that in your own time. I thought that was quite interesting. And I think, again, we touched upon this earlier. I think Gareth made this point. You know, as leaders, though, we're responsible for creating a positive work office to start with, culture and space, where learning and development is at its core. You can't, in my opinion, you can't ask junior individuals to come into the office who want to learn and not have the management community there to help them, because how they learn is by osmosis, by hearing their maybe more senior colleagues and managers, and going to a client meeting with someone or engaging with stakeholders with someone who's more experienced. And Charlotte talked about, we all want to stay at home with our cats. we need to get back in the office as well to really help this community, because we had that opportunity, and I really believe strongly that we should. Also, I'm finding that when I've made over the last year, I've tried really hard once it was appropriate to get back in the office to see my clients and to see how their culture has changed, so I can then discuss that with candidates with real credibility. And what I'm finding is a lot of clients now are organically changing their workspace. Clearly, you've got that commercial angle, but when their office is up for a refurb, they're making it a lot more collaborative to encourage people into the office, rather than having the old stick approach, that carrot approach. Come into the office. I went to see a large client, a mid-tier large client last week, and they'd read in their office and it was phenomenal. There was all these breakout areas. It was very collaborative. What they did in the kitchen as well, they just put a screen in the corner of the kitchen, so they had well-being meetings there with presentations. Just something like a fruit basket, like mat over a fruit basket, but it made a real difference. And that learning and development, and like I say, on the job learning as well as formal learning was received really positive by those trainees that I engaged with at that meeting. And again, I think we've touched upon this point, but to develop it further, I think it has been an absolute crazy mad time over the last 2 years for many of us. And I think a lot of catch-ups may have become more transactional from leaders than career development plans. And this generation, as everyone's talked about, Nick's mentioned it, Charlotte's mentioned it, they want a plan. They really want a plan. And again, it could be that we have to say, well, you're not going to get there in a year. That's going to take you 4 or 5 years. But I would advise once a quarter to have a career development update, to talk through mid and longer term objectives, because day to day, just going through transactionally what they've done on a day to day or week to week basis doesn't give that same stickability as knowing they've got that long term career plan and options. And then it's pretty much down to them to achieve it with your support. That work-life balance is really important to this generation, and I think that's a big generational shift from when I started work. It was that you had to put the hours in, you had to do those extra hours to really get to where you wanted to get to, whereas I think now it's all around that working to live. And 80% of young adults would consider a move for more flexibility or better work-life balance. But I do think there's a compromise here, because I think when you have a career, your job isn't always 9 to 5. I don't believe it should be constantly 15-hour days, but I do believe there has to be that collaboration and teamwork sometimes, where I think we need more communication and education to this generation that, as a team, it could be right that we do work an extra couple of hours tonight to get this job done, but it shouldn't because we're forcing them to do it. It's because they want to, because they're developing themselves and they're delivering to the client. And I think that's a good, I think that's something which we all need to continue to develop, in particular the generation, because I don't know, I certainly find it very hard when individuals, they leave on the dot every day, and maybe it's because I'm quite old-fashioned, but I consider myself to be an incredibly supportive person. I just think, oh, we should just finish up what you were doing for 5 minutes. Now, I think what's at the heart of retention, though, is an inclusive and nurturing culture with well-being that gives back socially and to the environment. And I think this is the generation that can really lead on that, and we can give them the autonomy to, to really go for it and make a difference, clearly with our guidance and support. And then they will feel they have a voice, they have that autonomy, and they will increase their cultural alignment. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lorraine. Great range of points being raised there. And as ever, if the audience has their own views, insights, thoughts, please put them through the chat box. It'd be great to see some nice contribution there. But Nick, I'm going to ask you to sort of add your thoughts to what Lorraine's been saying.
I will do, and I'm going to move around a little bit just to make sure that I avoid any repetition of what's already gone on. So let me just, there we go. So
I always think of repetition as emphasis, Nick.
Yeah, collaboration, complete agreement. Well, I mean, this is a huge subject. It's a difficult subject for me to present on because I like to give specific, tangible actions. My critical non-essentials, my marginal gains. And the thing is, there's not many in here. And when you can't do that in a presentation, you've got to just give some food for thought, really. And there's several areas that can do that on here. And I've just got 4 or 5 slides with not too many words on them. But the concept of the Great Resignation came in May 2021. And I think many people thought it was just here for COVID, and it's lingered. And I think initially it was aimed at, it referred to older people, but leaving employment. But now it covers everyone in the workforce, and predictions of 20% of people leaving jobs each year has been the case since 21, and it carries on to be the case. I'll refer back to what Chloe produced on the slides earlier, because that was interesting of all the different motivations for moving. But yeah, my 5 slides, there's no hidden answers, I'm afraid. So hopefully just a few bits of food for thought. So there's always some comfort in looking at context, and I mean, looking at the exit, these are the most challenging market conditions for employers in my 24 years in recruitment, not quite 25 years. The latest REC report on the number of job adverts is 1.7 million jobs advertised in the UK. That's more than there are live jobs out there. Just looking this morning on Indeed, there are 1,266 accountants jobs in Leeds. There's 829 jobs on Reed. There's a deluge of jobs. There's thousands of jobs being advertised everywhere. And they're not just, as this graphic says, in the newspaper. They're not just in the Accountancy Age magazine. There's loads of new technology, search bots, and new software that approaches people. I was approached about 2 jobs this weekend. My name's Nick Pratat from Pratat Partnership. The clue is that I own the company, but there's exciting recruitment opportunities for me with places that pay higher salaries than I'm currently getting. These are not real people, but my point is there's a deluge of approaches to your people, to your colleagues about jobs out there. And I link in this later on, I think on my slide 5. There's still the COVID legacy, and the main points on that. That was the point which would be the biggest reset of motivations, and the rise in profile of wanting a work-life balance and healthcare and well-being. The changing generations there with my Time magazine, I think we've talked enough about. But the wage inflation is huge, and just the one thing I'd say about that is that 6% in the UK year on year. For some areas in finance, it is more than that. But when the headlines in the news are of public sector workers going on strike for 20% pay rise, it doesn't matter what reality is. People are just governed by these figures, and there's an education piece to show a little bit more about what's realistic, rather than just taking the headlines from the Daily Mail. My next slide has been completely trumped by what Chloe talked about earlier. The First Intuition survey was a lot more detailed than what I'm presenting here. This is just the point of there are so many different factors why people are moving jobs. So these are 5 or 6 of the most regular that we saw with our placements and with our candidate network for young accountants last year. An interesting thing though, and this is a challenge, is that there are some people who we know, individuals who've moved 2 or 3 times since 2021. The first time was for higher salary, the second time was for modern officers, and the third time was for a better learning and development plan. So these things they're not always deep set. There's and coaching, culture, support from management, they all come into it, playing back on the things that Lorraine and Chloe have been talking about. Gareth mentioned my slide of there's over 50 factors. There's more than the 52 now of what we've seen have influenced people moving. It used to be so easy. It used to be easier than Gareth said. Not everyone was as complicated as wanting to get a salary that matched their age. They just wanted a good salary and a good job title. There are so many different reasons now. What employees want from a job has changed. So what employers can offer also just needs to evolve. So we talked a lot about the EVP in the first part. This is where the retention is similar to the motivation. All of these areas should be on an EVP. I'm going to keep this brief and just say what, for me, my 2 principles from a recruitment and retention point of view on an EVP are: number 1, this is a painting a 4th bridge exercise. This isn't a let's start to do this and launch it in 6 months, because whatever you do then will probably be a superseded. This is a do little things and do them regularly, because there's so many features within an EVP to maximize on the potential of positive retention and motivation. It needs to start, it needs to be perpetual, it needs to be constant, it needs to be talking to people about what they want, and it needs to be responding. And my second point is get some external input into this as well. We're a recruitment business, that's how we make our money, but increasingly we're spending more time with our key clients to audit their EVPs and to offer suggestions. And it's really hard to have a proper lens on the context just from your own insular 4 walls. Having a perspective from whoever your recruitment contacts are in the wider market is really valuable to make sure this keeps moving forward. And then my last part, which is really important, is to translate and to evolve this EVP into an employer branding. So going back to that 1.7 million job adverts with that army of robots who are approaching your staff with new jobs and new opportunities with better care, better well-being, better kitchens, better well-being areas in the kitchens, better sofas. You've got to have an employer branding that speaks externally but also speaks internally. I think this was a point that Charlotte mentioned. It might be someone else, about constantly talking to people about what they want. It's obvious that needs to be the case. The point I made earlier was most senior managers and directors are from Gen X. Most people we're talking about now are Gen Z. There's a gap. There's a difference. So unless you engage with those people for your employer branding, it's not going to be completely right. And the employer branding, I suppose this is my key message, is just make it regular and keep repeating yourself with it. Your people will be hit week after week, possibly day after day, with fantastic once-in-a-lifetime opportunities to move to another job. You've got to keep reminding them of your proposition. One of the common complaints I hear from employers at the moment is that they spend a lot of time on a new feature of their EVP and it instantly gets normalized or forgotten. And it can be something as important. One client I have in North Yorkshire did an EMI scheme, which costs them a lot of money, but it's dwindled into oblivion. There's the £1,000 cost of living allowance, which then gets expected the next year. It can be something as mundane as Easter eggs last year, but not this year. You have to keep reminding people of what you've done, because they're constantly getting hit by the greener grass on the other side of the fence, which isn't necessarily greener. So that's get the EVP right, modernize it, keep progressing it, turn up the dial for the volume and press the button on the frequency more. Make it on the social media, put it on the intranet, have a page on it on the personal development plans, use the engagement surveys and get someone to independently assess it and keep it moving forward.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. Much appreciate your thoughts there. I'm going to call on Catherine now, actually. Catherine, have you got a couple of things you might want to add on to what we've heard so far?
Yeah, I've got one point really. I think we've covered so much, and there's so much that we've got that is shared, that we've all prepared in advance, which is really great, because obviously these themes are really shining through. But I think there's one thing left of my thought process that perhaps hasn't been covered quite so much, and comes from a real example we've got here from a guy that graduated last year. We've got a couple of grads here at the moment, and also 3 that were in the apprenticeship route for us as well, which is really nice to grow them ourselves and to see how they've been able to you know, kind of get up to speed while studying at the same time. As we've all talked about, you know, these people, they're really keen to be involved in more than just the day job. You know, it's not just a 9 to 5. They care about more stuff, they're more involved, and we need to sort of value that really. And something that's worked really well for us is involving these you know, potential high flyers, or certainly we're hoping to kind of transform them and support them into being that, is to involve them in the bigger picture. You know, for myself as director of operations, I don't need any glory. You know, I can devolve and, you know, allow other people to have the glory in projects that they can succeed in. That actually means that, you know, the themes through our company are coming up from the ground upwards, which is much better and much more, you know, much more sticky than having things coming from the top down. So we've had a couple of our grads involved in key projects for us, which, you know, really line up with our purpose and really gets them involved in the journey of where we're trying to get as a company. And there's so many wins in that. You know, they're flattered to be asked. It gives them a chance to use the really fresh ideas that they've got from their you know, university courses, and teaches me some of the current themes and thoughts and technologies that are going on out there that I probably don't know about. So it's a real two-way learning opportunity. But it just, you know, in terms of retaining these people, if they're part of a much longer term strategy, which is, you know, really what the company is trying to achieve in the next 5 years, if they're really integral to that, then why would they want to leave halfway through? You know, they feel far more connected and involved in the long game of what the business as a whole is trying to achieve than just in their particular job and how they feel about that in any particular day. So I think allowing and recognizing individuals, you know, not everybody wants to be involved at that level. So, you know, some employees might find that really stressful to be involved in sort of strategic things, and it's extra work, and maybe they're not up for it. But for those that you've had those open conversations with, and they're really chomping at the bit to make an impression and to kind of get out the blocks as quickly as possible. And especially, you know, as Lorraine said, if you do have to say to people, actually, you know, you're not ready for that promotion just yet, but let's improve your profile, let's get you involved in something that really matters to the business, then you know, it gives them a chance to see that they're being noticed, that they're adding value, and perhaps you can then sort of, you know, just extend their prospects in their current role if you don't have a vacancy to allow them to step up into yet. But I think there's loads of value in sort of sharing some of the strategic bits with people that are really early on in their career. So yeah, and I think that's perhaps something that we haven't covered already, but I think everything else I've got, we've really been through. There's so many common threads, which is great to hear other people with similar experiences.
Thanks, Catherine. Javed, I know something that we'd talked about previously was, and I've seen this definitely in my sector with accountancy firms that have been what I think of as challenger firms starting up, which are often small, often kind of very jazzily branded. Often it's hard to even know where they're located because they're doing kind of remote cloud-based services. And I know you've got views on the role of technology in retaining staff or even attracting staff.
Yeah, sure. I think it was an interesting discussion we've had before around it. And when you look at the emergence of some of the newer accounting firms in particular, and I know, you know, 2 or 3 within Yorkshire, but I know there are very further afield, and 2 or 3 of the common threads you notice within there is they are very technology and social media savvy, and that technology and social media savviness is not just meaning that they're attracting employees in the younger generation into their place of work. So whenever I see them recruiting, they've almost, you know, they're finding it easy to find sort of young talent and bring them on board, because Nick, you mentioned about EVP, etc., that they're embracing the tech and social media side so much, and they're tapping into what inspires and interests the younger generation a lot. So you've got using the technology to attract and bring them on board, but also I think I do feel, and I know, you know, there may be predominantly finance people within this particular webinar, that the accountancy industry generally has a bit of an image problem around not embracing technology and automation quickly enough. And I saw a report in the US, and this may well be translated to the UK, if not yet, I'm sure it will be coming, that there are so many people leaving the profession, and amongst them, some of the reasons are the repetitive and boring nature of work. And I think I'm part of an organisation called Gen CFO, and I'm tasked with them to go Gen CFO North. And one of our values alignment is how technology is going to play a key role in really driving the industry forward. And you've got to look at an individual's workload, whether it's a young person or otherwise, and go, look, there's so much automation that can be done. There's so much you can sort of embrace sort of technology, AI, and bring it all together in order. And by doing that, you're reducing the monotony, you're reducing the boredom. And when you talk about, I mean, Catherine, you just talked about getting the younger generation involved in strategic things or ESG, or, you know, get them involved at an early stage. In order to do that, you've got to free up their time, because one of the big challenges is, well, actually, you've got the core role to do, you haven't got time to do everything else because there's not enough hours in a day. But by using technology and, you know, by automating, improving things, freeing up time, it allows the younger generation to get involved in some of the more values types areas around ESG, diversity, you know, sustainability, all these things that mean a lot more to them. So yeah, bringing it all around is really sort of embracing technology, and know that technology is there to make their lives easier. It opens up their time to then get involved in other things and then progress and develop quicker. And there's also then got to be an acceptance that generationally, yes, they will therefore know how to get from A to B in the most efficient way. So where in previous generations it might have taken 3 years for a certain development path, by using technology and everything else, they could actually do it in half the time. But, you know, as the older generations, not to resent that, but just know that technology is there as a friend, and it can benefit the individuals as well as the business as a whole.
Thanks, Javin. I think, you know, I hear a lot, particularly around the audit sector within the accountancy profession, that I think has a particularly acute issue with talent capacity, both attracting and retaining talent. And I think, you know, that's an area where, you know, data analytics tools, artificial intelligence are becoming even more useful and, you know, dare I say it, sexy. And whether, you know, audit, which perhaps has a reputation for being a bit dull and boring, and, you know, in my day when I was an auditor, I would be ticking bank statements for days on end, whereas actually that's all automated now. And as you say, the technology is actually creating a far more value add role for the accountant as more of an advisor, giving more insight, which I think is you know, far more interesting, hopefully far more appealing to people around that sector. So maybe we do need something of a rebrand for accountancy, for audit particularly. I'm going to call on Chloe now, actually, because Chloe she's done a big survey recently of students, which has hopefully shed some light on aspects of retention. So Chloe, have you got a few points for us?
Yep, sure. Let me just share my screen. So this part is specifically looking at the moving roles section, so retention. And we asked our students, well, firstly, this one is just looking at when people have moved. So you can see that actually the majority of people have moved who answered the survey, which was about 350 students. The majority of them had moved roles in 1 to 2 years. And the least was between 0 to 12 months. So I suppose that's quite reassuring for employers who are finding that a lot of staff are leaving at the moment. So we just broke this down more specifically by sector. And it seems that industry has actually lost the most people recently, according to our survey. We again did it by job level, So you can see that graduates are actually having the highest amount of people leaving at the moment. And you can see from the different years, 1 or 2 years ago, this would have been 1 to 2 years of training, which is something to bear in mind, that actually naturally people might move at different stages in their career. But yeah, it just gives an overview. But if we look specifically at the factors that have influenced people to move roles, so this is specifically looking at the people who have moved roles in 0 to 12 months. And you can see that the things that have been mentioned already are pretty high up here: the lack of career progression, that they didn't feel valued, not enough development opportunities, didn't like the culture. Interestingly, high up is satisfied, but more pay offered elsewhere. So again, it's showing that pay isn't completely irrelevant to these factors. But yeah, it's high, but there's a lot of other things that are contributing as well. Equally, we did it by commercial students and apprentices to look to see if there were different things motivating these people to leave. And for commercial students, it's career progression, whereas apprentices, they're more likely to move because they're being offered pay elsewhere, which is interesting, which shows that maybe commercial students are less motivated by pay. But then you've equally got that they've unsatisfied with pay here. So there's lots of different factors that are contributing it. But I think the main point is that depending on what student you're dealing with, they're going to be affected by different aspects. And it's these sort of things that you need to take into account, that, like what's been said, it's very much on the individual's basis.
Fantastic, thank you, Chloe. Well, I mean, you know, if we can share that report, I think there's a lot of really useful insight coming from that. And actually, we've talked there a bit around career progression, about sort of ongoing learning and development. So actually, just to finish us off in the final 5 minutes, I've got another couple of my colleagues on with us today who are just going to talk about some of the post-qualification education that we've been involved in, taking students beyond the day they qualify and that journey further into their career. So Crystal, I don't know if you might want to give us a little overview for a few minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Gareth. Let me just share a slide. So my role at First Intuition is I look after our post-qualification education programmes, and hearing all of those challenges that we see in the workplace, that's really what's driven my role, that traditionally in our industry, people will qualify and then start to look elsewhere, or they'll be promoted into a new role based on the fact that they've qualified, they've passed their exams. And our technical training skills are really important, but sort of at this point that someone's qualified as an accountant, there's kind of two issues that are really being created. The first one is that those employees will have been in a training program that's been fairly intense for 2, 3, up to 5 years perhaps, and it's been very structured as to where their career is going, how they're going to develop, and how they're going to learn new technical skills. Once qualified, that kind of drops off a cliff, but individuals want to know what their next steps are going to be. They want to know where their career is going. The other challenge is qualifying technically as an accountant, gaining the qualification is great, but it doesn't necessarily give you those skills to be able to manage within a finance role. Those people skills, being able to manage activities, being able to manage an area of the business. Certainly, I qualified as an accountant, and as useful as it is to know how to consolidate group cash flows, I've never had to use that. But skills that I've learned around managing teams, managing people, coaching, management of time and activities have been much, much more valuable to me. So part of my role has been that development of programs beyond qualifying as an accountant. How can we support people to our employers to retain their employees in role, and how can we support people in finance roles to have the skills that they need? And as you'll see, my little Venn diagram here of our finance skills, leadership skills, and digital skills. These are 3 areas that we feel are vital in that role in finance. And Although continuing once qualified, there are still finance skills you need. There'll be CPD, there'll be updates. Those leadership skills to move into higher roles, to develop your career further, we see as being really important. So we have a series of programs for those people who have qualified as an accountant to take them to that next level, from skills for those aspiring managers to those new managers, through to those people who are aspiring to be leaders and moving into early stage leadership roles. We do bespoke courses, and we also do public courses that are fairly structured through the delivery, that specifically are designed to give those management and leadership skills to people that are working within finance. The other area on my little diagram there was about digital skills, and we have also developed a series of digital programs. So this was something I've heard being mentioned, that those sort of digital skills are really important in every industry, but particularly within finance. Now, my colleague who's with us, Louisa, I'm going to hand over to just to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in the digital space.
So just a quick overview. We're into the last minute now.
Yeah, many thanks, Crystal and Gareth. Just a super speedy mention of what's going on in digital. And actually it really fits in with the conversation that Javed and Gareth were having about automation and AI. We've developed some digital skills courses to really help people, accountants and people working in finance, to help them with automation, and then getting those boring jobs like we talked about, the repetitive jobs done, so they can then actually really start to find value and find more interesting work in terms of finding insights in the data and helping drive the business forward and meet the objectives. And I think that really fits in with the challenge of helping to attract and retain staff and preparing for all the rapid changes that are going on right now with the likes of ChatGPT and generative AI. Very much getting ready for them. There's plenty of sensationalist headlines right now about how many accountants are going to be losing jobs in the future. But I think if we upskill, like Lorraine was saying, it's very much continual and continuous learning will really help. And so we've developed our courses at First Intuition. We've got Digital Finance Essentials, which is very much focusing on automation and then thinking about finding the insights in the data. And we've got a data analytics course focusing on digging into the data to get more value and finding the insights, but then also communicating those insights clearly, so to whatever the stakeholders might be, so they know what actions to take and what needs to happen next. And we've also got a range of technical courses as well to dive into the detail in terms of Excel and Power Query, and we're developing other courses in Power BI as well. And we deliver our courses far and wide on different media as well, whether it's in person, online. So that's just a little bit about what's going on in digital at First Intuition. But back to Gareth.
Thank you, Louisa. Thank you, Crystal. And I'm really excited that actually we're able to take our role helping accountants qualify as accountants beyond into their further careers. But I would like to thank all of our speakers today. So we had Lorraine, Charlotte, Javed, we had Catherine and Nick. So thank you very much. Thanks also to Chloe, Crystal and Louisa for their contribution. Thanks for all the stuff going in the chat box. Looked like some great input from the audience as ever. So thank you very much. Thanks everyone for joining. And I look forward to seeing you in the very near future on another of these webinars. But enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Thank you very much.